All right, there we go. Is that centered? Not really. Okay. So, I realize you guys didn't get a lot of forewarning. I did put a thing on the community section of the page last night that I was going to do a live stream in the middle of the day. But it's been such a while. It's been at least a week since I did a video or we did a live stream. And so I thought I would just touch base with you guys. So here I am. It's, 60-ish degrees outside, maybe 65. Kind of humid. It's been raining a lot. If you hear a buzzing noise in the background, it's the hummingbirds at the feeder. Uh, so, I've been really busy lately doing all the homesteady things. That duck that had the bumblefoot required me to go down to the duck house twice a day and give her shots. And the last thing I posted about her, I had found this Epsom salt gel that I had put in a sandwich bag and taped to the bottom of her foot so she had to walk on it. And it kind of took care of her problem. But the vet said she's always going to have like this scar tissue that duck. So if she limps, she limps. The garden's going great. Past night, eat greens out of it every day. We've been eating greens now since, the weeds started coming up end of February, March. We've just started planting our warm weather crops. So we've done that. And there's big things going on the property. You guys probably saw the video on another shed being delivered. Yeah, there's, we're busy. There's things. And then there's, the larger picture is what's going on with all of us. Whoa, hello. It's Crazy Canuck. Hey, jumping in for a few in between what? All tenders. All good up here with planting and spring finally here. Good, Crazy Canuck. I'm glad to hear it. I know it was really cold and some people up there, still had snow recently. Anyway, Pastor and I, we have, our relaxation part of it is just watching videos. And so I was on Prime Video and I watched a documentary called Catastrophe. And it covered a time period, and this is kind of what Wisdom Wednesday is going to be about. The Bible says to get wisdom and knowledge, and wisdom is knowledge with experience. Hey, it's Harriet. Shalom, Harriet. Good to see you. And Leslie, shalom. Shalom, ladies. The thing about getting wisdom is it's knowledge with experience, right? But the thing about studying history, looking at history, reading about history is you're going to learn lessons from what happened to the people back then. And then you want to apply that to your situation, right? Hey, Arthur Leslie and Sister Renee Forrest, help me. Shalom, shalom. So back to this video. Now, I know y'all know this. We're living it, right? 2020 has been a very strange year. We've had fires, we've had locusts, we've had this plague. And we didn't have that a year ago. So it makes me think like we need to look at what's happening in this year in a historical perspective. Is that Lone Star Living? Hey, shalom. And Mount Jen and Bethany. Shalom, everyone. So the thing in that Catastrophe documentary was an Irish physicist who had a friend who was a tree guy who's an arborist, noticed in studying Irish trees the tree rings that there was a year. I mean, there's more than one. This is, the focus of the documentary is this one section around 535 AD where the tree rings didn't grow at all. Any growth that they showed for those 2 years and also in 542 was like it was winter all year long. It had zero growth. And so this physicist is thinking like, why would that happen? And then there's a guy in England who studies Old English history, and he kind of stumbled upon those two guys, and he's looking at what was happening in England at the time, which if you watched, ooh, there's a tick. Yeah, we've been running around in the woods today, so I got some ticks on me. Sorry. It's a little nymph tick. I watched a video on Lyme disease too. These nymph ticks are the carriers, but we don't have Lyme down here. Anyway, the British historian, he's kind of a world historian. He's like he studies all kinds of ancient history. He noticed that in 535 AD in Rome there was a mention of the sky going dark, like the sun going dark. And again, if you know anything about history, in the Bible, when on the day Yeshua is crucified, the sun goes dark for 3 hours. And I believe there are prophecies about total days of darkness and so on in the Word. So to a historian, and then he looked in other places, and there was a Chinese reference, and there was a South American, maybe not a South American reference, but there was, I think, one more reference where he found people saying the sun had gone dark. And that, to me, that's significant, because it's also like plagues, fires, locusts, darkness. So the historian starts searching around. He finds several proofs that there was a time in there, and some people call that the Dark Ages in Europe. There was a time in there when crops failed, temperatures plummeted, and it was dark for 18 months. 18 months. In Rome, they said there was only 4 hours of sunlight a day. That's like being in a certain part of Alaska or Norway, where you only get 4 hours of sunlight and then it's 20 hours of darkness. But that's 18 months long. And I found that time interesting, because 18 months is also the time that our pandemic and the influenza is, that's the active time. That's when the Spanish influenza first raised its head. It lasted like 18 months. There were waves. There was a spring wave, and then a fall wave, and then a spring wave. And the initial wave wasn't as bad. The next wave was really bad. And the next one after that was kind of bad. And then it all kind of calms down. Either everyone died from it or everybody recovered from it by the time the 18 months was over. Like, that was the whole peak of the pandemic. So you have a time frame in Europe, in Rome, where there's an 18-month darkness. So then this historian kind of backs that up and says, all right, now what could cause that? What are realistic ways for there to be that much darkness on the earth? And so he starts talking to experts, and the first thing they look at is asteroids. And according to the experts, if you have an asteroid that, is so big that it falls to earth and it affects things, then you usually have some sort of corresponding coastal reaction, tsunamis around the world, whatever, flooding. And then when they went looking for that kind of evidence, they didn't find it. So they decided, no, that's out. So then they thought a comet shower, multiple comets striking the earth, because comets are striking the earth all the time, and what the signs of that would be, and they could not find signs of that either. So the comets was out. So the last thing they came upon was volcanoes. A major volcanic eruption could make the sun go dark for a year and a half. And so the historian starts searching around for, where are the major volcanoes in the world, because that is a known. That is a known. Good morning from Perth, Western Australia, Sister Kay Waboggin. Welcome. Shalom, Brother Mark. Shalom. Hey, Farm, I talked about you. I saw your little chicks on Instagram. So cute. Hey, over to Bus. Hey, McMikey. Shalom, shalom. USMC Connie Hey 91. Shalom, you guys. So we're going on this journey, this historical journey. And this historian figures out like where the active volcanoes were, and then starts looking for evidence that they may have blown at a time around 535 AD. And he looks at the one in Naples, Italy. I've seen it. I've been there. Vesuvius. They call it Vesuvio. There were some in Japan that he looked at. And then he looked at one called Krakatoa. Now, you know how sometimes I have things that connect to things and keep going. I just watched a movie called East of Krakatoa. It was done in 1969. It had several older stars in it, Maximilian Schell and Brian Keith and other people. Um, and it basically was giving an account of that volcanic eruption of Krakatoa in 1883. And that is a famous, known point in history because in 1883, people were recording events like that, whereas if it were in 535 AD, maybe nobody recorded it. Nobody was writing things down, or they keep it in their oral history, but they don't have an actual library with, how many about volcanic eruptions we've had, and so on. So I watched the movie and I think, oh my goodness, well maybe Krakatoa was the deal, and then find out that this historian also, I think the historian's name is Keyes, something Keyes, and he's the one who wrote the book Catastrophe, and that's what the documentary that I was watching was on. So Keyes gets the BBC to sponsor a trip to Indonesia, where Krakatoa is, and finds out in their writings that there were eruptions in the 535 time frame. And he Keyes pretty much figures that it had to have been Krakatoa because for the volcanic ash to have covered both parts of the hemisphere, because the records he found of the sun going dark for that long period are on both hemispheres. So, and while Bogan, maybe you know this, maybe it's a thing in Australia that everybody talks about Krakatoa, this volcano that erupts and keeps erupting. So he finds that Krakatoa did erupt in those days, and so he, looks for evidence in the ice. I don't know if you guys looked into this, heard about it, but in Antarctica and the Arctic, you get scientists who are digging tubes of ice down to 30 feet, and they pull it out, and then from what's happened in the layers of the ice, they figure out this was a year when there was some drought, and this was a year when, according to the pollen or the ash, or they find evidence of this huge volcanic eruption, a certain kind of carbon, slightest puff, airplanes can see it, etc. That this volcanic ash of a certain kind is evidence that there was an eruption at that time frame, and so they narrow it down. They find out this happened. Fascinating. Didn't know any of that. Explains the Dark Ages in Europe, why there was a cold time there, why not a lot was going on. Because here's the thing that I find really interesting. When an event like that happens and the volcanic ash spreads all over the world and the sun is not shining, then you have repercussions to that. Crops cannot grow. And so food sources fail. I'm going to try to look at some of your. Shalom Citricate, Deborah L. Right, exactly. Okay, so you have repercussions, right, to this ash being up in the air. And the first one is the darkness makes crops fail. So when crops fail and people don't have enough to eat, it causes changes in the cultures. It causes either everyone there dies and the culture collapses, or people move. They move and try to find, places to go where they can actually survive, because what they're used to eating isn't growing. And they have evidence that one of the places they might go is to a coast. Because if you go to the coast, then you can at least fish, and you can do things like, catch frogs or snails or whatever fish, clams, freshwater clam, eel, whatever. And so you have movement. And in another video I did in the past about King Arthur, King Arthur was a real person. Like the writing about King Arthur that everyone knows is actually French, and it comes in the 1100s, whereas Arthur was in the early 500s in Britain. And at the time, there are Britons, there are Angles and Saxons, and the Romans had just left. And so what King Arthur does, his mother is a Briton and his father is a Roman. He unites, you know, takes away from the Angles and the Saxons in 12 battles. I think it was 12 battles. Kind of takes care of the Anglo-Saxon power and becomes king, sits on the throne. But he ends up dying, has another battle in Normandy and gets wounded and come home and die. But in the legend about him, his kingdom when he comes back is failing. It there's plague, there's starvation, and so the time frame for his death is 502 AD. So if this eruption happened in 535 and you have 7 years of drought and cold weather, then that fits exactly, right? That fits into that history and makes a lot of sense. Definitely looking at current changes in our cultures, both thanks to nature and man. Westall Forge, welcome, welcome. We're talking old history. We're talking 535 AD right now, and some things that are going to be significant for us now. So you have, like I said, you're going to have a shortage of food, but it also causes changes in the weather. The ash and everything being up there makes it dark. So one thing that can follow on the heels of that is drought, because it affects the water, the whole water cycle with rain falling down and then getting really humid and too much water in the air and then cycling around in the clouds and all that. It affects it. And so there could be drought, which is going to make your food shortage even worse, right? And it's going to change your landscape and dust and all that other stuff. Never thought I would be scared to go to the over the bus, and I'm enjoying this lesson. All right, yeah, and you guys, feel free to go and do your stuff. Watch the documentary. It's on Prime Video. It's called Catastrophe. There's a book out. You can buy the book and read it. So, look, I'm doing a thing, and the guineas aren't going off. Wonder of wonders. So, I've got a few notes too because I wanted to talk about this. So, the volcano can cause drought. The prophet Elijah caused drought for 3 years in the Bible, and drought comes with its own problems. It's going to make the same kind of changes where people are hungry, people get angry. They are forced to move, and if you look at ancient history too, there are societies like Egypt that are cranking along, and then all of a sudden there's an influx of a bunch of people, and it's kind of like an invasion. And something like drought can cause that. So you've got all those changes going on at that time frame, and this is right after the volcanic eruption. Then you're going to get plagues. You're going to get plagues because your people are feeling weaker, right? They're malnourished, and so things like normal bacteria or a normal virus is going to hit those people harder because of the temperatures and the lack of food, right? So now you're starting to see sort of a pattern. And it's the same pattern that the Lord brings too. I mean, when he struck Egypt with all those plagues and things, the Lord will use the natural ways to do the same thing that the natural ways do anyway. So you've got these populations that are under all these problems. Well, then what we can start looking for is kind of like how this stuff happens, because this stuff happened again. It happened 535 AD, but then there's also the bubonic plague breaking out in like 1066 and again in 1200 and so on. And I'm covering a lot of topics here. I will kind of come to a conclusion. So let's look at the plague. Let's look at bubonic plague just for a minute. I thought, because this is, rumor, that the bubonic plague started in China, that ships from China were bringing the rats with the fleas, and they come to Europe at a port, and then the rats get off, and they start getting into the populace until you get an outbreak in somewhere like Italy or whatever. But modern science has found that the plague probably starts in Africa, in a part of Africa called their Great Lakes region, and I'm assuming that's like Lake Victoria and other lakes, and it's kind of in Central Africa. So Central Africa, there are rats that carry it there, And then the fleas that are on the rats are where the plague actually comes from. But here's a really interesting fact that I just found out in this documentary. The plague is in these rats, but it does not always come out. The temperature affects whether the bacteria in the flea gets activated. And so it's when something like this volcanic eruption happens and you go from a really hot temperature to a really cold temperature, and I think they said it's like, I don't know, 70 degrees or something below that, then this thing gets activated in these rats. So you get the volcanic ash, the sunlight, the darkness every day, crops failing, this bacteria in this flea gets activated. It bites the rats like they do every year, and the rats start traveling because the Great Lakes region of Africa is also a trading place. Like ships are coming in and out of the, going down the rivers out to the coast and then other places, and it spreads. So if you look at everything that happens in this 535 event, and the plague does break out. The plague breaks out, I think, around 600 AD. And then it goes around and it devastates Constantinople. I guess was a very large center in that time frame, because Rome had fallen to, oh, I'm trying to remember how this all worked out, but Rome had split. Now you've got the two Caesars, and so Constantinople takes a rise. It's a very Christianity is growing really big there, and then it's like a centralized location, and so you've got a lot of trading, and then the plague breaks out, and I'm trying to think now. There's also another tie-in right there with the plague. Yes, Yemen, I think Constantinople was in Yemen. That doesn't make sense. Anyway, Yemen is also a big training center, and I guess Yemen is in the bottom corner of the Sinai Peninsula. And plague breaks out there too, and it takes the population of a major city there from like 230,000 down to 10,000, and it causes people to flee up into other cities in the Sinai Peninsula. Medina and Messina, I think, is the other one. And there's a family in one of the, I think it's Medina, those locations, an Islamic family. They're not Islamic yet. An Arabic family of merchants and people who sell groceries. That's what they trade in. They trade in food. So at this time, because there's been plague and drought and all sorts of problems, that someone who's trading in food and can supply food is very well known, and they're very well off. And it just happens to be the Prophet Muhammad's family who is in the city, and they're the ones who are doing food trading, and they're also a family that is charitable to their city because of the plague. There's a lot of dispossessed people, a lot of people who are starving, and so they are, having like food kitchens, and they get well known, and then the Prophet Muhammad gets his, sign from God or whatever it is, I don't know, but that's where Islam rises, right there. So now think about that pattern, right? Darkness, crop failure, drought, plague. People are really hurting, and a family that is like a beacon of hope who is feeding the poor and so on, and then the rise of a religion out of that. It's a very interesting pattern when you think about it. Okay, especially when what's going on right now with us. Okay, then, I know I'm talking a lot, but there's so much stuff going on there. So now I'm going to talk about ticks and Lyme disease just for a minute. God's word say, oh, thank you, sustainable stewards. 20. Wow, yeah, it doesn't lower temps also support. Hang on. Also support virus growth. Not sure. Well, the thing about viruses is, because that's where we're going next, okay? Well, it's not even that, because what I want to track just for a minute is Lyme disease, right? Lyme disease is one of those things, like SARS, that we had not really, like growing up, I had not ever heard of that thing, right? Never heard of it. Now, we had Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and I think there was one other fever that doctors knew about that was tick-borne. And if one of you guys know what it is, chuck it up there. But Lyme, just kind of, it surfaces, in the 80s. And if I remember correctly, it's actually named after, I think, a place in England called Limning or Limning, Lymning. It's like a place where a couple of people were sick with it, but it doesn't catch anybody's attention, and it's not very serious for a while. And then it winds up that in a certain summer, a bunch of people in Lyme, Connecticut, start having the same symptoms. And so, doctors start looking into it. And it progresses, as you guys know, right? I mean, the bullseye mark on your arm is a sign, and the tick bite, the tick has to have been in you like 3 days. And then you start getting flu-like symptoms, and some of the major other symptoms are your body starts attacking itself, and your joints ache. You have a lot of joint ache, and it can affect even like your balance. And some people who are really badly affected by it can't even walk anymore. It makes you very weak and tired. And so, for a long time, people go to doctors with these symptoms. They don't know what they are. They go from doctor to doctor. The doctors aren't sure what to call it. And then finally, somebody understands, hey, this is Lyme, and they call it Lyme, and they start to treat it. And they treat it with antibiotics. So it's a bacteria. I have a friend that can only eat fish now for meat because of Lyme disease. Exactly. Hey, Lake Lady, shalom, shalom, and Ann. Lyme can only take 6 hours. And, it's certainly possible. I mean, you never want ticks on you. That's why you saw me picking that little guy off. Pastor and I check each other all the time. Thing is, Lyme is affecting people differently. Some people get completely disabled by it, and some people don't. I tend to think that's probably more the individual's genetics than anything, but I don't know. But what they're finding is some people need that antibiotic treatment for 4 years. That they keep, they get it under control, and then it springs back out. And wow, so many thoughts going through my head. If I remember correctly, it's a spirochete. It's a spiral thing. Either that or Zika. My goodness, I should know this better. But some people have to have the antibiotics and they're good after 6 months. Some people have it and they're good after 2 weeks. Some people have it a really, really long time. And so the doctors who are researching it are looking into, like, where could it have come from? And, have people had these symptoms in the past and we just didn't understand what was happening to them, and we assumed, they had arthritis or whatever, because I think one of the doctors said a third of the people, or 20% of the populace in the United States has arthritis, 20% of the populace has, achy joints, 20% of the populace is unstable on their feet. So, I mean, how do you pick out that this is a thing versus what normally occurs with other people? They don't want to test for Lyme up here, but if you get a tick and go to the doctor emergency, they will treat you for it anyway. Yeah, see, the thing about Canada is Lyme was only in a certain part of the U.S. It was kind of following a pattern where it spread out west, but it wasn't going north. And so you weren't seeing that much of it in Canada. But some of the people who have it now are Canadians, and they're coming all the way down to the U.S. to get treated because the Canadian doctors are like, we don't know, or we're not sure how we want to treat you. And there's been a doctor up there, I forget his name, he was a Chinese guy who was treating people with the antibiotics, and then the Canadian government said, no, we don't want you to do that anymore. And they kind of forced him to retire, because I can't remember what they said, what reason they used, but he had to retire his practice. But somebody finally did some research, right? Somebody finally said, well, maybe it's been around longer, and they found, I'm trying to get this right, it's in the belly of mice. Lyme is in the belly, gut system of mice. And then the ticks bite the mice, and then the the ticks are also like hanging out, waiting for forest animals to go by, and they glom onto some other animal like a bird, and these birds fly all the way up into Canada to do like their winter stuff. And because of global warming, parts of Canada, southern Canada, are warmer in the winter, and so ticks who fall off up there are not dying, and they've got Lyme in their gut system, and they're affecting Canadians. They're biting Canadians, and Lyme is moving north because of global warming. Okay? Our government doesn't need a reason. There you go. So think about that, because this is kind of where my whole talk has been going, with just the pattern of things, how it happens, and what brings about these changes and stuff. So let's look at, they found Lyme in like old, I can't remember, millions of years old. They found a mouse, what do you call it, fossil, and they did the dissecting and whatever, and found Lyme in it, that it's been around a really long time. It's been around a really long time, and it's not just new. It wasn't made in a lab. It didn't just pop up in the 80s. It's been around a long time, but maybe it hasn't been outbreaking in the populace because of the temperature. Maybe. Maybe cold weather keeps that down, and the warmer temperatures, global warming, are letting it come back out. Then look at these locusts that are rising up in the Middle East. The main reason they were saying, is because of rainfall. It's cooler and there's rainfall, and so they're coming out. You get what I'm saying now? I'm not a believer in global warming, as the humans are warming up the planet because of all of our emissions and whatnot. I don't believe that, but I do believe temperatures change. I do believe temperatures fluctuate. And I think things like a volcanic eruption affect that. So, and it can be other things too. They talked about asteroids. They talked about comets falling down, but also large forest fires can affect weather. It can affect it locally, but if it's big enough, it can affect it bigger than just like, the next state next door. And another example of that is in Indonesia. They do burning off of their forests, and it covers Malaysia with a cloud of smoke when they do it. These fires in Australia, and Wobogan, if you're still on, I would love to hear your comments about it, because you're the guy on the ground right there. But those huge fires in Australia this spring could affect the weather in that area and around that area. Let me see what you guys are saying. Whoops. Sorry, it's cyclical, solar activity. Mad Kelt, shalom. Still good for later today. Shalom, Mad Kelt. Those tick removers are awesome. I lost audio, just me. Let's see. Okay, so if we look at 2020, we have these huge fires. We have the outbreak of a virus. Now, I'm not sure that this virus, you've seen my comments on the community board, you've watched my videos, seen my live streams. My latest, based on what I'm reading and seeing, idea about our pandemic is it probably was a man-made virus. It's either an experiment that's gone wrong out of that biological lab in Wuhan, and the Epoch Times documentary on it, to me, seemed to make some sense. Now, I'm not there. I haven't gone to Wuhan to see if there is actually a biological lab nearby. I have to take the word of some people who've done some research, which the Epoch Times did. They're an online paper, and a journalist went and did research into, what was going on there, and looked to me, had evidence that there was a doctor who was looking into bat viruses, etc., etc. Wow, and there was something else. I think Zika. think Zika virus. I was looking into a documentary on that too, and it supposedly came from bats as well. And that it is not. I have a theory about Zika. This is just a little aside because we'll get. I want your questions. I want your comments. I'll stop talking for a minute and we'll discuss. But Zika, it kind of pops up and it's in Brazil mainly, and it's affecting kids with the microcephaly. But that's not the only time that's happened. There is a 1930s movie, I think it's called Freaks, and it's about circus freaks, like the woman with the hair and, the big strong guys and twins conjoined at the hip and things like that. And in that movie, there are two adults who have microcephaly who are supposedly Hispanic. And even though it's kind of like a movie, first was kind of like a documentary. It was talking about real people at the time. And so I'm wondering if Zika is not a virus that is in the bats in their area. And when certain conditions happen, either really hot or cooler or hunger or whatever, that it is also activated and comes out. And it's in mosquitoes. Zika gets passed by mosquitoes. And for a long time, it would have not been showing up because there was a worldwide movement in the early 60s to wipe out mosquitoes because there are so many mosquito-borne illnesses. In America, a pesticide called DDT was created to kill mosquitoes and was sprayed all over the country. In all the wet, swampy areas, there would be foggings in towns where you were supposed to go inside and trucks would drive by and be spraying this mosquito killer out into like your front yards and ponds and lakes and everything else. And it worked. Mosquito population was greatly reduced. And so there was a disappearing. There wasn't nearly as much yellow fever, malaria, blah, blah, blah in the United States, in the southern United States, and possibly in South America. And then the Zika gets activated and it starts, there was, I think they said 10,000 cases in Brazil. And so they did a pesticide, I don't know what it was, but they put pesticide in the water and everything else down there to kill the mosquito population. And then they started introducing biologically altered mosquitoes to try to kill the mosquito population down there. And I think, man, I'm trying to remember, one of the things that they introduced through the mosquitoes was a DNA change that made the larva mosquitoes kind of die. That they couldn't develop and become an adult. They just hit a certain point in their growth and they died. And I think there was another one in America where the biological female mosquitoes were sterile. So they were reducing them and they would mate, but they wouldn't have offspring. The problem with mosquitoes is unless you kill them all, that one or two mosquitoes that are out in the middle of a swamp somewhere in a tire are going to have babies, and they said they reproduce very quickly, and so the population's going to come back. So in South America and Brazil, they were continuously releasing these biologically changed mosquitoes. Every 2 weeks, they were releasing 250,000 of them. And Zika kind of disappeared because of it. But then you have to wonder what's going to happen when the pesticides that they put in the water, drinking water and everything else, are in the populace, and what's going to happen as a result of that over time. And it's the same thing. We have to look at all this stuff relates. We have to look at this pandemic that we have. We have to look at our weather. It is mid-May in my neck of the woods, which is a subtropical belt. We're in a subtropical area. It is 62 degrees today. It's been 55 degrees here now for 3 days in mid-May. Kind of weird. Like, I'm not complaining about that at all. I know what the weather is going to turn into here, and it's never easy for us to deal with it. But what is going to happen? Are the fires that happened in Australia going to change other people's weather? Because they're talking about, global warming, but is there going to be global cooling because of that? And if there is global cooling, then that can cause bubonic plague to raise its ugly head. Um, and even in those days, people understood that bubonic plague was passed around by mice and rats, but they really didn't know how to treat it. We know, I think there's even a plague vaccine. So we kind of know how to deal with it. There's still areas in the world, just like now with this pandemic, who are not able to handle large scales of people um, being sick at one time. And kind of summing up now all these little facts and bits of information together, it's going to reduce the populace. It's just going to happen. Now, I'm trying to remember. Gorilla, what's his name? Mosby has a blog. And he did a recent thing on the virus. And I kind of agreed with him on this. You really don't know the numbers of people who are passing away from this virus compared to the normal amount of people passing away at this time of year from other things. We really don't know if it's a huge effect, a huge difference, or a small difference. And you know, there's a whole part of our populace who thinks right now it has not been worse than the flu. But we also don't know what it's going to do in the fall. We don't know how it's affecting people. And it's raised its head again in China, which I'm not saying I could have predicted it, but anyone who follows how a virus acts knows that it's been mutating. I'm back. Mountain Gorilla Blog. That's it. That's it. Exactly. It's been mutating this whole time. It's been mutating through 180 different countries. All the populaces it's affected, it's been mutating the whole time. So we don't know what it's going to look like come fall. It could have gotten much less serious, because that does happen with viruses too. It's not a guarantee that it'll be worse, but it's a 50-50 chance that it either gets better or worse. So we don't know how serious this thing's going to be until it's all over. And my prayer is it's not that serious. But when you have fires, locusts, and a pandemic, that usually means population reduction, which brings about changes. That's the other part of this whole historical look back and wisdom that you're looking for, is the political changes that happens when we have all of this stuff going on. So I already talked about one of the things that can happen when the food, and have we talked about food shortages? Do we know anything about food shortages, people? Have we been looking at food shortages? Yeah, no, we have. I have coworkers in the Northeast, and they're saying schools are discussing a cancel for the next year, right? And I want to talk about that too, Lone Star Living, because to me, there's something there as well. But if Tyson's shut down their plants, and they have, if beef production places shut down, and they have, if people are forced to kill pigs and destroy crops, that means shortages are coming, right? People who don't get enough food are weaker and get sick and die. We just talked about it. It was part of the 535 pattern. And we talked about what happens when there is food shortages. People start moving. Okay, they go to places where they can get food. So it would be somewhere like a warm weather climate where food is growing year round. That's one of the things Pastor and I noticed when we lived overseas in Asia. Year round you have mangoes. Year round you have bananas and coconuts and all sorts of things growing, passion fruit and so on. So people are going to move to locations where it's easier to get food. But then the political stuff starts. In the old days, if my tribe was hungry and we moved into your area and you're kind of weak, you're not, you're just living there, but you don't have a good organization and you're just kind of hand to mouth in it. My tribe may take over your tribe's area because it's me or you, and we're already hungry. So we got something to fight for while you're just hanging out. And so there is movement, but there's also war. There is unrest. There is unhappy populaces looking to their leadership, hey, we're hungry, provide food for us. And Pastor talked about the tribal, what do you call it? The tribal organization, the responsibilities of the tribe leader, the chieftain, is to provide for his people. And he's only in power as long as he can do that. And once he's no longer able to provide for you, he gets overthrown. Excuse me. So we've had plagues, we've had this pandemic, a loss of population. We don't know how severe it's going to be. May not be bad at all, may be great. Political unrest, movement, and war are results that come out of this pattern of things happening. And it's something for us to look for, because the wise person watches. The wise person looks for things that tells them the pattern of what's coming. As well as, and I'm not, you guys know me. The Bible tells it also. The Bible tells us the pattern for end days, what signs and things to watch for. The Bible tells us in Proverbs that the wise man sees the danger coming and hides himself from it, and also that the wise man prepares for things that he is told. Like Joseph doesn't show up in Egypt and decide, okay, I'm going to become the guy running the granary and I am going to store wheat for an entire nation. Joseph shows up as a slave. He's captured and he's put in the position of a powerful person's household. But as a believer, Joseph also knows, here I am again, because you're trustworthy and because you do a good job. The Bible promises that if you take good care of what you're given and you can increase it, that you will be given even more. So Joseph does that in Pharaoh's household, and he's thrown in jail, guys. Don't forget that. He doesn't go from I'm a servant to now I'm on top of the world. He spends 3 years in jail, right? And while he's there, humbled, with no power at all, he still believes in the Lord, and the Lord delivers him again. So it is through the signs, the things that he's shown through these dreams, 7 years of famine, 7 years of fat, right? He's shown the fat cow, and then the fat cow is eaten by the lean cow. So Joseph understands it, and he's paid attention, he's watched, and then he moves. He's elevated up, he's given responsibility, and he knows what he's supposed to do. When the lean years come, I need to have food for those lean years. So he's the watchman, and he's actively doing something because he knows what's coming. Same thing for us. We need to keep watching, because the political unrest can come, right? For whether you like President Trump and his administration and how they're handling the quarantine or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is what is. And online, on what do you call it? Twitter, there's a whole movement of political unrest. There is a whole bunch of people tweeting about the horrible things that Trump's doing, the direction that the country should be moving in. It's undermining the stability of our government and what's happening in our country right now. And it's not by accident. One of the people that I saw doing this was, at least the Twitter account was Chinese, right? It could be a Russian posing as a Chinese. I don't know exactly, but it was a Chinese, what do you call it? Twitter account. And that person was saying, oh yeah, well, you don't need to have any of your modern medicine. You just use Chinese herbal medicine. It'll be fine. That's how you're going to beat this virus, right? And I thought to myself, okay, so they're trying to undermine the medical response that we're having in our country to this virus by saying we need Chinese medicine, herbal medicine, and so on. And some people in our country would be saying, yeah, we need to do that thing. We need to grind up snail shells and we need to set them on fire and breathe the smoke, or whatever whatever herb root thing that these people are trying to push. But I'm here to tell you that that's not what that person was doing. That person simply wanted me to think, oh yeah, whatever the Chinese are doing, I need to be doing that thing because my country's doing it wrong. Which to me, it's disinformation. The Chinese herbal medicine is the reason that animals like rhinoceroses and tigers are endangered. The people shooting rhinoceroses in Africa were doing it to cut off the horn to send to China because the Chinese think the horn powder makes the man more virile. They are the direct link there. There's no question in my mind about that. And so that was my reply to this person. I said, you are the reason there's almost no rhinoceros left. And to me, when you take the Father's kingdom and you unbalance it by wiping out an entire species like that, you're messing with his plan, and I don't agree with that. And so I retorted that to him, and he came back with a, well, you don't know what the heck you're talking about. I mean, this person got really mad, and I didn't care because I knew what they were doing. And it's there. There is that whole undercrust of people who are trying to undermine what's happening here because political unrest will bring war. If it's not our country having the war, it'll be an outsider seeing we're weak and wanting to come into it. Or somebody messing around with these superpowers that my husband's always talking about. China, Russia, the United States, BRIC. So we need to watch. We need to watch, we need to pay attention, and we need to prepare the best we can for what will happen in our area. I don't think, man, those two National Guard guys who went down to try to assassinate Maduro, come on now, people. This is not how you're going to, you cannot affect that kind of change. You can't. You can't just get on a boat and think you're going to go to a foreign country, you 2 or 12 or how many of you there are, and think you're going to get anywhere. You're going to land in their port, and their port guys are going to be like, no, dude, no. Or land on the coast. Can you imagine if somebody landed on the coast of, say, South Carolina, a foreign-speaking person who's definitely military-looking, and starts walking and says, I'm going to go to Raleigh, or I'm going to go to, just name a town, and I'm going to assassinate the mayor? Get out of here. Not going to happen. So that's why you need to prepare yourself for what you think is coming. And that's why I'm laying out this pattern, because it struck me as, wow, isn't that interesting? Another point that one of the documentaries made, I did clove on the head and burned the back. Okay, so you guys are talking about something else. Something else that I did notice in these documentaries I was watching was there has been very little volcanic activity here on the Earth, but also in the U.S. for the last 100 years. There have been a few, like Mount Rainier, volcanic explosions, but there have not been a lot of really big ones. And volcanologists are saying, like, that's unusual. It's unusual for there not to have been some kind of big volcanic activity in the last 100 years. The other thing, Krakatoa relates to that is Krakatoa, when it blows, it builds up. There's like 3 or 4 little islands around it, and they build up. I think it said 5 meters a year. So 15 feet a year, these islands build up, and they kind of form a cone in the middle, and it gets to 1,500 feet above sea level, and then the whole thing blows apart. And that it's when the whole thing blows apart that it's a very major eruption. The eruption in 1883 was felt like 4,200 kilometers in one direction and 2,300 in the other direction. I think it said England heard when Krakatoa went off in 1883, and somewhere, I'm trying to remember, the Mauritius Islands heard it the other direction. So all those, people who were screaming and crying, and I thought it was kind of hysterical, but now I understand there's a reason for some people thinking this could be a very serious thing. One of the largest calderas in the world is Yellowstone. And the caldera is like the whole bowl where the volcanic activity happens. Yellowstone is one of the biggest ones. And so I'm not saying, I am not saying that Yellowstone needs to go off or may go off or anything like that. I have no idea what the pattern is for that caldera. But if you lived near it, you might be considering, things that could happen. What is the possibility? What is the probability of that? And it's something else for us to watch for. The political unrest, volcanic explosions, and the results of this pandemic. And how's our weather doing, right? These are signs to look for. Okay, so that's the end of my talk. How long did I talk for? Man, I talked for an hour. I thought I was going to talk for 20 minutes. What are your questions and comments? And well, no, I won't. I'll let it stay up here, but I'll look. Susan Bryant came inside for lunch and can't believe I made it for a live chat. I have known folks down here. Mid-range eruption of the Yellowstone caldera would be catastrophic for a third of the U.S., Wes said. Exactly. And it's going to cause, now that I know, it's always been the fact, but now that I know that Krakatoa caused 18 months of darkness when it went off, the Yellowstone caldera is going to do the same thing. If and when it goes off. If it's like you said, even a medium-sized thing, it's going to cause that nuclear winter, as they call it, which would be the result of, a nuclear war. It'll cause the volcanic winter. It'll cause months and months of darkness. And for us, as a prepper, do you believe we're in the final days yet? Woodsy, here's my... First of all, what I'm looking for and what you are looking for end days may be different things. Okay, and I'm not trying to say I have an absolute, I don't. What I'm looking for is the two witnesses. Because the Bible says there will be those two witnesses who are witnessing about Yeshua, and that they are killed and lay in the street, and everyone in the world sees them, and they rise again. So that is the sign that I'm looking for to know for sure it's the end times. Now, you guys know, I've already said, it is a very curious thing that you have fires, locusts, and a pandemic in 1 year. That certainly could be part of tribulations. But when you look for the specifics of tribulation in Revelation, there's a lot of bad things to happen to non-believers and those who are warring on the believers. And so that, in my mind, that needs to mesh too. Okay. More important than buying, what killed the trees? The trees that they tested in 535 they didn't die. They showed signs of great stress. Now, the one was used as some kind of timber. It was cut down, and I forget if it came from a ship or a building. And there were fortifications along the coast there in Ireland that were that old, that were from the 500s, that were still in place. And I believe they had been, because it was on a coast, these timbers had been waterlogged, and so they cut a section of it and compared it to the other one that they got from the building, and they were just like cut from the same tree almost, the rings. So it wasn't necessarily that all the trees died there, it was just they found that the trees were showing signs of stress then, and the ice cores that came from both hemispheres backed up the fact that there had been a volcanic eruption. Okay, so what did Westfield Ford say? There are more preppers than before. Oh, that was my other question. Thank you so much for making this comment. Taking that into account, hang on. Taking that into consideration, we'll never stop becoming better preppers, finding our holes. If any of you had spouses before the events of this year, before December through April of this year, whose spouses did not think prepping was worth a dang, that thought you were nuts, that made fun of you, how many of you now your spouse or your family has said, dang, you were smart. Dang, you were wise. That was another question I wanted to put out on this live stream. We are growing more of everything, bigger gardens, more animals. Pharma, exactly. Everyone should be. We're not, I'm not the only one who said it. Pastor's not the only one who said it. Lots of people are saying, because of the food shortages more than likely coming, you need to be doing those things. And here, I think people are listening in general, because a dozen duck eggs in our area, just for eating, for sale, I think they're either on Facebook or Craigslist, are $8 to $10 a dozen. I'm here to tell you, I think the last time I tried to sell duck eggs, I sold them at $2.50 or $4 a dozen. Online buying chicks from hatcheries, they used to be, $1.50, and some chicks are now $6 per chick. And there's also shortages and backups. The last time I knew someone ordered some chicks from an online hatchery, their delivery date was beginning of July, and she was ordering them in mid-April. End timers are not interesting times are at hand. We are having a hard time getting plants to grow here in Texas. Wes S. Yeah, Wes S. So, right, everybody's got to grow their garden in their area according to how it works. Like, I'm planting stuff, I'm eating stuff in February. That does not mean Pharma is able to do that up there where she lives. So we need to also look at artificial, and I'm not crossing my arms because I'm defensive. I am really enjoying talking to y'all. It's because it's a little cold here and my feet are soaking wet from all my chores earlier. So I'm a little nippy, but we have to think about artificial ways to up our production. So if you're in a really dry area, and you can, I'm not saying, go ahead and water your plants, right? If you have the water, if you can get your hands on the water, if you can do rain catchment or whatever, and you're in a dry area, water your plants. Make sure your plants are healthy. Another concept that we all need to be looking at is covering your plants with hoop houses and things outside, even now. Like if I did that with my garden right now, because the temperatures are as low as they are, some of the things that want that warm stuff will grow better if I cover them. Sustainable Stewards channel, she's up there in Wisconsin, and her growing conditions are, pretty extreme in my opinion as far as cold and things. And she has excellent suggestions on how to make your plants grow better. Take the time and trouble to get manure. Take the time and trouble to mulch your garden, because this is a year you do want it to be as productive as you can. Get fertilizer. I'm not one who normally wants to buy fertilizer. I like to create fertilizer. I like to compost and things like that. This is not the year to be cutting back on all that. This is the year for you to be going all out on it. And we need to think about grow lights too. Or growing something when the sunlight is only 4 hours a day. If you have electricity, not a problem. Get a grow light system, set it up in your house, grow indoors. But if you're off grid like me, it poses a different problem, because our solar, when there's no light, is not going to support running a grow light. So Pastor and I have to really consider how we're going to make this stuff happen. Here's another something for all of us to consider. Chickens need 14 hours a day to form an egg. If there's only 4 days of sunlight, it's going to take a chicken 4 to 5 days to get enough light to form that egg. So all these things you should be taking into consideration, and that should affect your prepping. Now, let me see comments. Have family members tell me I was smart for planning ahead. Just hope their mindset shifts and stays shifted. Exactly. My hub is now a prepper for sure, giving me advice. Laugh out loud. Well, hallelujah that he came around. Spouse's brother both apologized, and they're on board now for a Ledwin mare. Hallelujah, right? I mean, better they do that than they stay with their mindset. My chicks are free, Pharma says. Yeah, well, when you do it yourself, that's another really good point. Get a hen and a rooster. Those fertilized eggs you can incubate with your electricity. You can make more chickens for yourself, and you can start selling them because there's an entrepreneurial opportunity for you. If you're the person in your area who's hatching out ducks or has fertile duck eggs, which I've been told go for $50 a dozen online, um, then you're the one selling chicks for $6 that are 3 days old. And here's another tip for all you all. The 4-week-old hen, 4 weeks old, yeah, she's fully feathered out, right? She's called a pullet, and a pullet sells online for anywhere from $20 to $50 a piece. So if you hatch your chicks and raise them up to be 4 weeks old and then sell them, you're going to be able to sell them for more money than you even sell that little chick for. It's just up to you whether you want to go through, the 3 or 4 weeks with her, paying for her food and providing the heat lamp and everything until she's old enough to lay. Eggs here are $4 at the farms. My family has said, wow, we are glad we've been doing all of this prep for about 5 or 6 years. Well, hallelujah, great. Duck eggs taste the same, and duck great baking. We are back to drought conditions from 101 to 106 degrees last month. Okay, Wes S. So you've known me a long time. I'm going to tell you a little story about drought. And I've done it in other videos, so please bear with me if you've heard these tales. And it's anecdotal, which means I don't know this happens on a huge scale worldwide. I can only tell you what happened with our family. So when we first came to the city we live on now, it had been droughty here. At night, one of the times we camped here, it was 100 degrees at midnight. It was awful, and there was zero undergrowth here. I'm going to just take you over just to show you part of our side yard and why I think this is kind of a significant thing, okay? It's all part of the story. You see, this is my side yard, right? There was no undergrowth when we came and saw this property, and when we bought it, Pastor and I discussed it, and we understood that we were buying something that was kind of like high desert because we expected it to be really sandy and just with some trees and no underbrush. So we bought it, and we didn't move here for like 15 years. We just paid off and visited it every once in a while. And one of our moves, when we moved closer to this property from the East Coast, the place we moved to had been in drought for 3 years when we showed up. The temperature was pretty hot in the summer and went down to minus 20 in the winter. In the first year we moved to that location. And after that, it started raining and there was no more drought. Fast forward now, 12 years from that time, and now we're going to move down here for the move around 2012-ish. When we came down, and I'm trying to remember if it was the summer before that or just a few years before that, it was drought here, very droughty here. I remember talking to the neighbor, and the ground was brown. The road that we drove in on was dust. And we asked, I heard a thunderstorm in the background. I said, oh, maybe finally it's going to rain. And he said, no, we've been having those things. That's just going to be like I forget what he called it, but it was a thunderstorm with no rain. And then after we moved here, the first year we were here, it was droughty and there was hardly any feed to be bought. And nobody could grow potatoes. Nobody could hardly grow anything. And after we were here, for the last 7 years, it's been like this. When my daughter and her husband moved to an area where they went to school, she taught there, and then her husband was doing online schooling. It was western Kansas, and when they got there, it was very droughty. One of my early videos talks about it, shows it. It was very droughty. None of the creek beds had any water in it. They said it had been about a 20-year drought. My my daughter and her husband moved out there, and the very next, like 6 months later, it was raining there. I I attribute that to a Torah keeper moving to an area where there are no Torah keepers. Um, Now that's only partially true. With my daughter and her wife, it was definitely true. With us moving to the area that we moved to after we came out east, we were not Torah keepers at that time. We were just really believing Christians. Um, when we moved here, there were some older Torah keepers in the area, but not very many in number. And this is what has happened. Now, you can argue it was all coincidence. In all those instances, buying this property, my daughter moving, us moving, you can say it's all just coincidence, and that's fine. I'm not going to argue with you about it because it's anecdotal. But in my mind, when you start keeping Torah, the more obedient you are to the Father's way, the more He rewards you. And so, in my mind, if you start resting on the Sabbath, He's going to start rewarding you for that. When you stop eating unclean foods, He's going to start rewarding you for that. When you start keeping His feasts, whether you do it, perfectly, there is no perfect. If you try doing it, I think He will reward you for that. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Wes, if I was where you were and it's 101, 106, I would start trying to put shade up over my plants using tarps or hoop houses or the plastic panels, the vinyl panels. They're corrugated, but they're vinyl that Home Depot and Lowe's carry. Also come in colors and are clear. Some of them are clear. So if you put up some sort of cover over top of your crop, you could have it from clear, so sunlight definitely got to it. Let's say it's on the north side of the house. Or you could have it all the way to like a dark green or maybe a tan or even a white to either keep the heat off or provide more shade. And so that's another option for you. We are, okay, so let me go on. Let me go on. We are going to water glass our eggs this year while we're getting a lot. That's a smart thing because that keeps them fresh for 6 months. One of our good friends keeps Torah and is a pastor. He was robbed of several thousands of dollars of preps and coins while he was moving. Wes, bad things happen to believers too. I am not promising that if you keep Torah, your life is without tribulation, because believers in general, it is my belief that the church that says if you have Jesus, your life is all fluffy bunnies and cotton balls, that's a myth. That is not a biblical truth. It's in James. I want to say it's James 2, maybe James 5. There is a talk of pilgrims going to the Tower of Siloam, and they are crushed when the tower collapses on them, and they are believers. And James says, do you think that they were more wicked or evil than you are? No, you're just as wicked and evil as you are, so you need to thank God that you're alive today, because basically stuff happens. So I cannot say, I have no judgment upon your friend who was a Torah keeper and a pastor, but bad things happen. And we live in this world, so we have to understand to take precautions against things and to understand, car wrecks happen, fires happen, trees fall on buildings, stuff happens. Okay. With the hoop structure, With the hoop structure, you can skin it with chicken wire on the inside so it does not rub and destroy your plastic shade. Exactly, you can support it. I made a milk stand that way with a hoop. I just put, I didn't put the chicken wire, but the hoop itself was like the support under the tarp. The only problem was the wind would pick that whole thing up and it acted like a wing. Just 4 weeks ago, he quoted, "There is an evil under the sun I have observed." Man, whoa, man. Excuse me. Funny you mentioned bunnies. Y'all blessed me with a couple of wild ones. Fajoling, the problem with wild bunnies is they will eat your fruit tree. They'll bark them. There is an evil under the sun I have observed. God caused the rain to fall upon the just and the unjust. But God also uses the natural world to reward or punish people as well. As I said, Elijah brought a drought. So one thing the Lord does promise is a peaceful, quiet life. Now, I'm not saying the peaceful, quiet life is without any problems at all, because we live on this earth. Of course, there are problems, but in general, it's a peaceful, quiet life. All right. I just hope they don't cause me garden trouble. For John, guaranteed they will. They will eat things they shouldn't. Barbara Bunny was a perfect example of that. She got loose, and she wasn't a wild rabbit. She was a tame rabbit, but she went into the garden every night and ate what she could get her little teeth on. So those rabbits are going to eat stuff that you plant, no doubt, unless you protect it. I was thinking the world comes after believers more. And it just kind of depends. I mean, each one of us is tested according to what Yah knows we can bear, and also to teach us things. Because he says after tribulation comes wisdom and hope. So yeah, you're not guaranteed to be without it. But the Lord is using it to sharpen you. He's using it to grow you and different things. So, you know, Wes's pastor friend obviously needed to learn a lesson there. I don't know what it was, but it may have just been try to be more secure. I really don't know. And that's not really my decision. Okay. Are bunnies clean to eat? They are not. One clever girl. Not for humans, no, because they chew the cud, but they don't have a split paw, right? Yeah, because cows have a split hoof and they chew a cud. So, no, they're not clean for humans to eat. And in those days, as in nowadays, they can carry trichinosis and some other diseases that are not good. And so we are told in Leviticus, I think it's Leviticus. See, I'm not a pastor, so I'm giving you general information. We're told not to touch the dead carcass of unclean animals. And so pastor's plan is to have rabbits for our dogs to eat, but we're not going to eat them. What's that's correct, Sister Kate. I will have trap and move the bunnies then. Hope they don't breed. Right. Unless you want to feed them to your dogs. Totally up to you, Fajali. Too cute to eat. Sure. I mean, if you don't have a garden that they can get into, or you don't have an orchard that they can get into, they're very cute to watch, but they can be very destructive. Got to run. Good talk today. Great wisdom. Shalom all. Well, thanks for swinging by. Does anyone have any other comments or questions about any of the stuff I was talking about? I always wondered about that. Didn't someone in scripture get honey from a dead lion? One clever girl. I would have to look into it more before I can talk about it. One clever girl. You touching a dead, unclean animal. Right, but see, if you're biblically unclean, it doesn't mean that you're going to die the next day. It means you are not able to go to the temple, that you would have to purify yourself. So it could have been because honey is something you can eat, you know, and if it was provided by the Lord, then absolutely you can eat it. You just would then be unclean, and depending on how unclean you were, you know, you have to clean yourself, have to wash yourself, spend a week outside the camp, etc., etc. So, all right, let's see what else is going on here. I'm putting plastic on the greenhouse this week. Seeds go in the ground Saturday. And that is Mad Kel. Yeah, one of my goals for this summer was supposed to be build end things on my greenhouse, and I haven't done a thing towards it. Okay. Wild rabbits are important. They feed the predators and reduce the risk of flock predation. Okay. Always a good time and good info. Sergeant James, glad I caught the stream, even though YouTube didn't notify me. Yeah, some people say that YouTube doesn't. I try to put it out on my community part of my page too, but I'm pretty wing it, so I don't always even get it up there. Have to go hang out with some chicks. Shaloma, hee hee hee. Gotta go. Shalom, Tony, Melissa. You have to go. I didn't even know you guys were on here. Well, bless you. Okay. Any other questions? Comment. I didn't think we could eat rabbits or squirrels. One clever girl. Yeah, squirrels know also. Does take research to solve the wind problem for sure, but I think essential with weird weather ventilations. The world comes after blue. Whenever I have a down moment, I think about Job and what he endured. Is that Arthur Leslie? Yeah. Job's enduring was for the glory of the Lord. And the whole point of his enduring was to see if he could be separated from his faith. And that is the problem with the teaching that everything's going to be great, because that brings a false hope, and as soon as there's tribulation, then the hope fails. It's kind of part of that whole story about the seed being planted and the cares and the worries of the world kind of killing the faith. So Job's enduring to show that there's a lot of stuff that can happen to you, but you keep faith in the Lord and he rewards you after the trial. That you keep your faith. That's one of the messages of the whole Gospels, is actually he who endures to the end of the race. And that's all about faith. It's not about you being able to run a marathon. Okay. Anything else? Tularemia is one reason not to touch a dead rabbit. That's it. I said it was something else. What did I call it? Trichinosis. Tularemia. That's exactly right. I have greenhouse doors plus frame lumber. Wish I could drop them by for you. Well, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So thanks for joining for the sentiment. But that's interesting that some of us get notifications, but others don't. I get it. I got to notice. Well, it's just because you're special, Lone Star Living. When I see cottontails, I hear coyotes. When I don't find feather and count fewer chickens. Tell you what, man, coyotes are no joke. I watched that documentary again on coy wolves and coyotes, and they are so adaptable and so capable. And just the point of that whole video was that coyotes, the more you try to trap them and kill them, the more they produce. And so they are here to stay, and they are, yeah, you want to take that into consideration. So to get off so I can eat some lunch, keep your eye on what's going on. Keep reading your word. If you are a believer, stay with your feet on the straight and narrow path and keep your faith in the Lord. Keep watching and keep prepping. Keep being wise and smart. And I'm of the mindset you need to stay home. And if you go out in public, to have the mask and the gloves and to wash your hands multiple times, because we still don't know the after effects of what this virus is going to cause. And so avoid it. Be wise and avoid the danger. All right, bless you all. Shalom.